Hey, Allison, good day. So imagine how big of a challenge this is. Every single American in the country, spread out coast to coast, corner to corner, who wants a vaccine needs to get 2 shots within 3 weeks, and they have to rush these shipments to these diverse corners of the country in a very, very tight timeline. But the people in charge of this insist they're up for the job. It's a massive logistical challenge. How to move hundreds of millions of doses of a COVID vaccine to Americans across the country. Pfizer's vaccine must be kept at 70 degrees below 0 Celsius. While it waits to submit the vaccine for emergency FDA approval next week, the company is already setting up a deep cold storage supply chain using suitcase-sized cooling boxes to ship critical supplies to doctors and hospitals nationwide, possibly by later this month.
Once they take it out of the ice, they can keep it 5 days in the normal fridge. So we have worked extensively to develop this distribution network.
As part of Operation Warp Speed, the military is working with drug makers like Pfizer to coordinate distribution.
So once you say execute, how fast does it get out there?
Within 24 hours.
Do you have doses of vaccine already stockpiled?
Yes, we do.
Pfizer says it will ship doses from its facilities in Michigan and Wisconsin. With each person needing 2 shots, the company expects to have enough for 25 million people worldwide this year, another 650 million next year. In North Dakota, where they are suffering through the nation's worst COVID death rate, health officials are already working on getting the vaccine to remote corners of the state.
We did identify locations throughout the state that have ultra cold chain storage capacity.
A U.S. advisory panel has already laid out who could get priority in receiving a vaccine, starting with frontline doctors, nurses, first responders, and nursing home workers. Then people of all ages with 2 or more risk factors. The next phase would include teachers, school staff, child care workers, and people working in the food supply chain. Phase 3 would include children and young adults 30 and younger. Phase 4 would include everyone else living in the U.S. One other note, we mentioned these special small containers that they are using to super cool the vaccines when they ship them. They can only open these containers for 1 minute twice a day. That's it. If it goes any longer than that, they run the risk of some of these vaccine doses going bad. And the vials themselves are now being specially created by Corning, the glass maker, because typically vials will crack in that kind of extreme cold. So yet another layer of complication to all of this. Allison?
Hey, Allison. So I'm in Morristown, New Jersey, and just yesterday around 1 p.m., Governor Murphy announced a new set of restrictions that primarily target the food service and hospitality industry. And this is coming on the heels of a big uptick in cases in the state, and we're now at a statewide death toll of about 16,440 people. So the governor felt compelled to act before things potentially got worse going into the holidays. So this is what the restrictions look like. From 10 p.m. to 5 a.m., there will be no more indoor dining, only outdoor, and there will be no more bar seating available to people at any time of the day. In addition to all of that, there will be no more indoor interstate sports. But the main group here that's concerned about these changes, it's the owners of bars, diners, lounges that cater to late-night audiences. Just like this late-night diner that's right behind me, it's owned by a man named Peter Rostidis. He's owned it for over 2 decades, and he's nervous about what this next round of restrictions could mean.
You really can't prepare. I wasn't expecting it, and now we have to close our indoors at 10 p.m. And we used to be a 24-hour diner. Now we stay open till 3 a.m. From 10 to 3 a.m., we lose the young people, the people that work late, the hospital people. So there is an impact on our business. People like to go out. I mean, it's a very trendy town. So we will lose. We will lose, definitely.
So to put some of what Peter's describing in national perspective, the National Restaurant Association estimates that about 15% of eating and drinking establishments have closed during the pandemic. And Peter tells me he estimates that he's going to take a hit with these new restrictions of about 10 to 15%. And keep in mind, that's on top of what he estimates to be about a 30% hit that he's already been dealing with throughout this pandemic. Back Back to you, Allison.
The number of separated migrant children hitting a new high. Lawyers are now saying that they can't find the parents of 666 migrant children separated at the border. That is 121 more children than they reported to a federal judge last month. The lead ACLU attorney trying to reunite these families saying that it is taking a toll on the kids.
Kids that are even verbal enough, old enough to articulate it are telling us about how anxious they are. I mean, I just met with one teenager who was one of our first plaintiffs who said every time he encounters anything new, his chest tightens up.
NBC News Justice correspondent Julia Ainsley and Jacob Soboroff broke this story. Julia is here with me now. All right, so Julia, last month lawyers said they couldn't find the parents of 545 children. Now it's 666. What happened?
Yeah, I know that's kind of a creepy, scary number, but that number is signifying more children and more parents than we knew of initially, because it's parents who weren't even able to be contacted. Basically, the ACLU, lawyers like Legal Alert, and others who are nonprofits who are taking on the task of finding these families because the U.S. government decided that it was too onerous for them to do. They were not given phone numbers or addresses or any contact information for this additional 120 some. So that is in addition to those 545 we talked about last month, where they had tried to make contact and couldn't reach out. They said maybe some of the information had changed. They begged the U.S. government to give more information, anything they could do to track down these families. And then they added on this extra piece. And we know about it because of an internal email that came from these lawyers to lawyers for the Trump administration at the Justice Department, where again they say, we need more information, we need your help. And Allison, I will say that we saw just a little bit of budging from administration lawyers after our last report on the 545, when they got to court in front of that judge who's overseeing the reunification process, just 2 days after our story and a day after the president and now president-elect were asked about that issue on stage. Lawyers then said, look, we're now here and ready to help. But people like Legal Alert are telling us it might be too little too late, because when they started separating these families in 2017, there was no process to keep track of them or to let them know where they could find their children.
Julia, the numbers are just overwhelming. Let's talk about how young these children are and what else you know about how they're doing.
Well, we understand about 20% are under 5. And so when Legal Alert talks about them not being verbal, I mean, you can imagine if you were separated in 2017 before you had a good memory of who your family, your parent was, it can be really hard to verbalize kind of your feelings, let alone how to get back to them. And it reminded me of reporting we had done where we looked at this pilot program in 2017, where they said the lessons they learned there, these are the prosecutors who were responsible for prosecuting parents who have been separated. They said one of the lessons that should be put into place is not to separate a child too young to find their own way back to their family. They need to know their address, their phone number, all the things you would teach a young child when they're old enough to figure out how to get their way home. And that is because they didn't have a system. It had nothing to do with what was moral or anything. It was simply because they didn't have a system. They had to put this on the children. And as sad as that sounds that they even had to talk about that, that guidance was ignored. They didn't implement that when they started the 2018 policies. So we're talking about really young children. And right now, some of them could be in the foster system. Some of them could be living with relatives in the United States. But what makes it so hard is that a lot of their parents have been deported. And it's very hard for lawyers to try to get on the ground, find these parents, and let them know the rights they have to see their children again.
Julia, it's not just sad, it's frightening to think that they would be taking children away who have no way of getting back to their parents, don't know that kind of information. It's just so upsetting every time we check in with you about the latest here. The deputy director of the ACLU Immigrants' Right Project is concerned about the information provided to the ACLU. Here he is.
I mean, these are families that were separated in the beginning of the Trump administration. To the extent we got phone numbers, some of them were useful, most were not useful because the numbers are just stale at this point.
Julia, is there any clear indication the government even has this information available?
Yeah, I mean, that's the problem. In a lot of cases, they might not have the information available. So now let's look forward, right? It was a sad thing, and we look back on it and we pick it apart and we figure out who is responsible. But looking forward, we have a new administration coming in. So I've been talking to people in the incoming administration about what their plans might be, because we know that the president-elect Joe Biden has said on day one he wants to establish a task force to find these families. Well, because this information wasn't gathered early on, it could still be very difficult. But they want to move this responsibility at least partially onto the government, and they want to try things like a public service announcement, get onto the radio in Central America, explain to parents that they do have the option, they do have rights to come back and see their children, and to try to reach as many as possible. So that's what we're looking toward next is it possible with this very limited amount of information for a new administration to come in, make this a priority, and see that these families are reunited?
Julia, it seems like this is going to be a difficult task. What have we heard from President-elect Joe Biden about how he plans to deal with this and tackle this? Because this certainly does not seem like something that is going to be resolved very quickly. This may be a problem that's on his hands.
Yeah, and one thing that they have not committed to yet, Allison, and I've been asking for the past 48 hours, as many people in the incoming, whether it'll be the transition to Biden or the campaign, have been asking as many people as I can, are you going to give these parents the options of coming to the United States to reunite with their children? In other words, will they have special protections where they're able to be flown here, see their children, and maybe apply for asylum, again, try to get a protection because of this very extraordinary and extreme thing that happened to them? And so far, we don't have a public commitment from the incoming administration. We know it's a tough task, and we'll be watching to see what they do next.